This is Defense Domain, your source for strategic insight on global security, defense systems, and geopolitical risk. This is the weekly strategic brief. Week 17 covers the period from April 25 to May 1, 2026. This week reflects a consolidation of coercion-driven conflict management. The United States is shifting away from diplomacy towards sustained blockade-based pressure against Iran. Maritime control is now directly linked to economic coercion, with efforts focused on restricting oil flows and shaping access through the Strait of Hormuz. At the same time, the strait has emerged as the central arena of control competition, where access and restriction operate simultaneously, and where global shipping functions under persistent uncertainty. Turning to the operational environment, conflict dynamics are expanding beyond the battlefield into industrial and economic systems. Ukraine's long-range strikes on Russian energy infrastructure, combined with growing risks to subsea cables, reflect a shift toward targeting functional lifelines rather than frontline forces. This marks a transition toward systemic warfare, defined by disruption of production, logistics, and connectivity at scale. At the systemic level, alliance cohesion is under visible strain. Friction between the United States and European partners is increasing, particularly over the Iran conflict. These tensions are beginning to affect force posture discussions and burden-sharing dynamics within NATO. This indicates a shift toward more conditional and transactional security relationships. Turning to the Iran war operational assessment, the conflict has now exceeded 60 days. It began on February 28, 2026. It spans more than 10 conflict theaters and directly affects over 20 countries. Missile activity has exceeded 120 waves. Between 30 and 40 Iranian naval vessels have been degraded. More than 35 commercial vessels have been attacked or damaged. Over 400 tankers have been halted or rerouted. More than 40 ships have been turned back under United States blockade enforcement. Daily transit through the Strait of Hormuz remains below 10 vessels, compared to a pre-war average of approximately 140 per day. This reflects a sustained collapse in maritime throughput. From a structural perspective, the conflict has entered a systemic coercion phase, following earlier phases of escalation and distributed control. The current phase is defined by sustained blockade enforcement and expanding global interdictions. Turning to operational dynamics, the conflict has stabilized into a coercion architecture, combining military, economic, and maritime mechanisms. The maritime domain is now a controlled coercion space. Blockade enforcement, selective transit permissions, and interdictions operate simultaneously. Economic warfare is fully integrated into military operations. Financial pressure reinforces physical restrictions. Proxy warfare continues, but it no longer drives escalation. Energy systems remain the central pressure node. Disruption and controlled reopening of flows shape global economic impact. Diplomatic channels persist, but remain fragile and conditional. Turning to maritime control dynamics, control is no longer confined to the choke point itself. It has expanded into a distributed global interdiction space. United States operations now target Iranian-linked shipping across wider maritime routes. This reflects a transition from localized blockade to global enforcement architecture. At the same time, Iran reinforces an asymmetric denial model. Fastboat swarms, vessel seizures, and selective access enforcement. These tactics shape a system based on speed, dispersion, and unpredictability. The result is a persistent degradation of maritime traffic. Shipping flows remain structurally suppressed. This is no longer temporary disruption. It is a sustained operational condition. Turning to the Strait of Hormuz, the corridor has transitioned from a transit route into a persistently degraded and managed maritime system. Traffic flows remain significantly reduced and occur under constrained and uncertain conditions. This reflects neither full denial nor normalization, but controlled instability, where access is shaped by competing coercive systems. Turning to regional conflict dynamics, in Lebanon, Israel has expanded air operations, including strikes into the Bekaa Valley, despite an active ceasefire framework. At the same time, Hezbollah has resumed rocket and drone attacks. This creates a condition of controlled confrontation, where ceasefire mechanisms coexist with sustained military pressure. Turning to maritime enforcement expansion, Israel has intercepted Gaza-bound aid vessels in international waters near Greece. This reflects an extension of blockade enforcement beyond immediate conflict zones and raises legal and political tensions around humanitarian access. Turning to the Ukraine war, Ukraine is expanding its deep strike campaign, targeting Russian energy and industrial infrastructure. These operations extend into rear area systems and prioritize disruption of economic and logistical capacity. At the same time, Ukraine is integrating private actors into its air defense structure, deploying interceptor drones and automated systems. To protect critical infrastructure, artificial intelligence is also being deployed in demining operations, improving detection accuracy, and reducing risk to personnel. This reflects a broader shift toward hybrid and distributed defense models. Turning to regional instability, clashes between Pakistan and Afghanistan have intensified. Heavy exchanges of mortar and rocket fire have caused significant civilian casualties. Despite ongoing mediation efforts, tensions remain unresolved, indicating a risk of sustained border instability. Turning to energy and maritime security, the United States is considering a prolonged naval blockade, potentially lasting several months. This would place maritime interdiction at the center of economic coercion, while increasing exposure to prolonged energy market disruption. At the same time, the United States is proposing a coalition-based framework to restore navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, combining naval coordination with diplomatic and information-sharing mechanisms. Iran is advancing an alternative vision, positioning itself as the primary security provider in the Gulf and rejecting external control. This creates competing governance models for control over a critical maritime choke point. Turning to hybrid threats, the conflict has exposed vulnerabilities in subsea cable infrastructure. Damage and repair constraints increase the risk of prolonged digital disruption. Russian cyber operations are expanding, including phishing campaigns targeting political and military personnel. These operations exploit human behavior rather than technical vulnerabilities. At the same time, the United States is expanding legal pressure on state-linked hackers, using arrests and extradition to extend deterrence beyond national borders. Turning to defense technology and industry, the United States and European Union have aligned policies to secure critical mineral supply chains, reducing dependence on China. At the same time, China has imposed export restrictions on dual-use technologies for European defense firms. This reflects increasing supply chain competition and fragmentation of industrial networks. Ukraine continues to expand deep strike capability, reaching targets up to 1,500 kilometers inside Russia, focusing on energy transport systems. At the same time, artificial intelligence is reshaping mine warfare. The United States Navy is deploying AI-based detection systems, capable of adapting to new mine types in real time. Turning to global power competition, the European Union has sanctioned Chinese entities linked to Russia's military-industrial base. Beijing has signaled potential retaliation. This extends conflict-related pressure into third-party industrial networks. At the same time, tensions between the United States and Germany are increasing. Disputes over Iran policy are expanding into discussions on troop presence. This reflects growing divergence within NATO and pressure on alliance cohesion. Turning to systemic risk, disruptions in maritime trade through the Strait of Hormuz are affecting fertilizer supply chains. Rising costs are influencing agricultural production decisions and increasing the risk of reduced crop yields. At the same time, energy shocks are accelerating renewable adoption. Countries are expanding solar capacity and investing in alternative systems to reduce exposure to volatile fossil fuel supply chains. From a cross-domain perspective, several structural signals are emerging. Maritime control is shifting from choke point dominance to distributed enforcement. Infrastructure targeting is becoming the core mechanism of modern warfare. Alliance cohesion is becoming increasingly transactional, and supply chains are emerging as primary instruments of strategic competition. Looking ahead to next week, key developments include United States decisions on sustaining or expanding the naval blockade of Iran, responses from partners to the proposed Hormuz maritime coalition, the outcome of the United States review of Iran's negotiation framework, Potential Iranian retaliation against maritime restrictions. The continuation of Ukraine's deep strike campaign. Operational performance of private air defense integration. Potential Chinese countermeasures following sanctions. And the stability of the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. This was the Defense Domain Weekly Strategic Brief. For more in-depth analysis, visit defensedomain.com. Stay informed. Stay strategic.